My name is Dr. John Griffin. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers, Olivier Bilodeau, the Director of Research at GoSecure, and Masarah Paquet-Clouston, oh, I'm so sorry about that, Clouston, who is a security researcher also at GoSecure. They are also organizers for the next NorthSec conference. And I don't see the clock going yet, but let's go. All right.
Perfect. We have so much content. Let's just keep on going. So hi, I'm Masarah Paquet-Clouston indeed, and that's Olivier Bilodeau. Today we're going to talk about social media manipulation driven by malware. So let's start right away into the topic. So back in 2015 and 2016, we were studying, Olivier was working at ESET with a fellow, Thomas Dupuis, a fellow worker, and they were both studying Linux Most, which was known to be an IoT botnet conducting social media fraud. At that time, they were studying version 1, and then Olivier switched job and started to work at GoSecure, and ESET luckily shared to us the second version of the malware. And at that time, I was still an intern at GoSecure, and we had that great idea of partnering up all together. Me, my professor at that time, David Descarrier-Dessus from University of Montreal, and my tax, a non-profit research organization in Canada, to actually study the second version of Linux Most. So first, you must be wondering why we say Linux Most, because we're going to talk all around the clock about this specific IoT botnet. Well, Linux Most, this is because when Olivier studied the malware in 2015, they found in the binaries the word élan. And we're French Canadians, and élan in French means moose in English. And for that purpose, I decided to call it Linux because it's actually targeting embedded Linux systems, and Most to give it a Canadian touch, although they probably aren't Canadian at all. Linux Most is an IoT botnet, as I said, that conducts social media fraud. What is social media fraud? Well, it's the process of creating fake likes and creating fake accounts to go online and then creating fake likes and follows on social networks like Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. A very good example of social media manipulation that we can give is a journalist in Quebec. So she decided to become an influencer by cheating, and that was for an investigation, not for her own purpose. So what she did in December 2018 is that she created that fake profile called The Pretty Runner and started posting pictures of her running and all that. And then we met with her and she told us the different methods that she used to increase her visibility. So she used follow-on-follow methods, like for like. She also entered into groups called pods, where influencers post pictures of themselves and then like each other to give themselves more visibility. And she told us that she firstly bought fake followers. So that fake followers gave us that sort of first ground base of visibility, and then afterwards she worked with different methods. Today what we're gonna do is focus on this last process of buying fake followers, and we're gonna focus on the supply side. So who is actually selling and who are the actors? So basically, today's presentation is about the ecosystem of social media manipulation. This presentation is about a 4-year-long investigation that started in 2015, in which we use various investigative techniques, so including traffic analysis, reverse engineering, investigating forums, and trying to understand what's going on among the actors. And we sort of had that sort of big conclusion of being able to map all the actors involved that are related to the IoT botnet and sort of understand where the money was flowing. So from this presentation, I hope you sort of start seeing differently social networks and how we can actually create social media manipulation. So let's start.
Yep, so first off, let's recap what Linux Most is all about. So Linux Most in our ecosystem fits with its feet right on the ground. So the base layer of this economy, and it's the only thing that is doing some real illegal activity, criminal activity. The rest is all terms of services breach and stuff like that. Sarah will cover that later. In a nutshell, Linux Most affects router and Internet of Things, but we like to precise that, avoid the hype. We're talking here about Linux embedded systems with a busybox user land. If these requirements are not met, Linux Most will not infect it. It has a worm-like behavior, so it spread itself by using telnet credential brute forcing, and its main payload is a proxy service which supports several protocols. And when we studied that proxy, it was solely used to proxy social media traffic. We deployed a honeypot to be able to catch it and detonate it and be able to track the activity. I'm not going to delve into the details. If you want the full details, you should look at our previous presentations and paper on the topic. We deployed these honeypots worldwide, so we have a very large footprint, and we studied and tracked traffic for a long time. And we performed an HTTPS man-in-the-middle attack where we weakened we had access to the raw traffic. And this is a short description of how we performed it. We can get into details, and we have other papers that dive into the details. But in a nutshell, what happened is we got access to the raw traffic. But then, what can we do with the traffic, Masarah?
Yes, so at that time, where did we stand? Well, we had several infected hosts used actively by operators. We also had HTTPS traffic in plain text, just because of the man-in-the-middle attack. We had CNC traffic and publicly available seller markets. So I mean, anything online which we could actually help our investigation. And this is when we presented at Black Hat Europe in 2016. If we're not going into the details, it's because everything is actually documented in 2 papers that we published and in the presentation that we did. If there was one thing after that presentation that we didn't talk about that sort of yielded this research is the concept of whitelisted IPs that was within the infrastructure of Linux nodes. So I'm going to try to be really clear because you have to focus here. So whitelisted IPs were actually just servers that had the right to use the network, the infected devices. So they were found in the beacon messages, and since they had the right to use the botnet, they were the only one being able to send requests through the network of infected devices, we thought, potentially this could be a reseller model. Why? Because, well, you could have whitelisted IPs, so it's simply servers, right? Where somebody just logs in and then sells Twitter followers, go on that server, and then sends, you know, like the order through the botnet, so it's actually completed, right? So that was our main idea. So we thought, and we wondered how we could sort of confirm or refute that hypothesis. What we did is traffic analysis. So we correlated the PCAP's traffic that we had with the MTM proxy log. It took us a while to actually be able to correlate everything together. Then we used Jupyter Lab, a very cool tool that exists where you can actually do data frames and then easily graph everything using clustering heuristics and data science. And then we developed different variables we thought could indicate us whether or not the whitelisted IPs would represent a reseller model. So for example, honeypots used, website targeted, TLS fingerprints, user agents. All these variables didn't yield much result. I spent lots of time analyzing, except from 2. So 2 variables, accounts created on social networks and accounts followed on social networks actually yielded the response. So basically, whitelisted IPs were meant for fake account management. So each whitelisted IP was related to a fake account that was linked only to that whitelisted IP, but they were all following the same accounts, potential buyers we call. So we couldn't say, oh, this is a reseller model because they were all following the same accounts, so it was most likely one organization. But since they were managing fake accounts, we could conclude that this is most likely what they're doing. And it makes sense. It's hard to manage fake account on Instagram or on Twitter if you have 100,000 of them, right? It has to go through the same honeypot, so it's the same IP, and it has to look legitimate too. So where did we stand at that time? Each whitelisted IP addresses had their own list of fake accounts. And additionally, through our investigation, we found out that each of these whitelisted IPs were hosted on Windows servers. And talking to somebody at OVH, that person told us that remote desktop protocol was actively used, so RDP was actively used. What kind of piece of infrastructure could sort of glue all of this together? Windows servers where somebody can just remotely connect to them and then manage lists of fake accounts to produce fake likes and follows.
So this is where we enter the automation software part of chapter of that story. Automation software is basically a thick client that runs on Windows that will offer you a grid layout where you manage thousands of fake accounts on Instagram and you order them to do stuff. And what we've found is we found an ecosystem of such software provided by various different vendors. So we place that actor here right besides the moose because it interacts with it. So you see our little ecosystem building up here. Automation software, what we try to do with it is we try to find the one that Linux Moose uses. And so we based this research on user agent. We knew that both mobile and desktop user agent were underused, and it needed SOX proxy support because this is all what we saw in the Linux Moose traffic. We found different sets of features from different vendors. I'm listing them here, but it's like, user agent, custom browsing pattern, different types of proxy, different scales of account management. And we found different business models. So some offered unlimited account support for Instagram and other social network. Some were one-time fee payment methods. Some were pay per month. Some were pay per account per, bulk. Like 100 of accounts is a different price than the 1,000 of accounts. So we're going to go through here a list of the one we studied, and then we will conclude with a table summarizing all the results, which unfortunately I'll have to go quickly over, but you will have the slides if you need the information. So Gram Dominator is one of the first one we found, and the Dominator suite they have for all social networks. So they sell verticals for specific social network, and they have also Social Dominator, which covers them all, which is more expensive. Here you can see that it fits what we needed. It has proxy support and it runs several Instagram accounts at the same time. When we started reverse engineering it, we realized that they were not using a static list of user agent, they were using a device generator. And when looking at the device generator, we found that they were really tokenizing the user agent strings exactly like Instagram does it when it configures its HTTP client inside the application. And so we stimulated using PowerShell that library, and we got different user agent strings, and you see that it's pretty convincing and very similarly looking to actual phones you would see in the wild. Next up, Social Dominator. So this is the big view, it's pretty small, but if I zoom in, you see where the grid layout stands up. So we only have one account in there, but if you have more account, you would see like one below each other. You also see in that screenshot that you have a proxy address per user account. So user accounts will be pinned to a specific proxy, which means that it will look like a human. It will always use the same IP, right? It will come from the same residential IP. You can, import in bulk different information, and you have a log of if stuff that it's doing is successful or not. So this is Social Dominator. Then we studied Follow Liker. Follow Liker, we have a little anecdote, little story with it. So when I first tried to run it without using the launcher exe, I got an error saying like the Java runtime is not eligible for distribution. And so I looked at it at the binary, and I figured that they were using a packer called Jeb, which it compiles Java into what looks like a mix of C++ and native code, and have its own JIT inside of it. So it's like 267 meg of native code. So it was really daunting, right? And so they were using an expired version of Jeb, which we found because in the strings in one of the main binary, you saw that they were linking to an evaluation version. So how did they work around that evaluation version? Well, in the launcher, they embedded a UPX packed version of run as date, which they would launch to fake the date on the system so that the evaluation version would run. So it's pretty fancy and sophisticated just to have a really well-packed, but for free, version of that software. All of this to get a software that looks like this, which is pretty standard like the others. But it was a very well, defended, if you want. And we analyzed all of them, and we didn't find the software that Linux Moose was using. There were always a little thing that didn't work. And so we will need to move on to study more automation software in the future. But now, where do we stand? We've found several automation software vendors, and we know that the reseller model is not at the botnet level. So Masarah, please introduce us what you found.
Yes, so let's go back to the HTTPS traffic that we had that was actually decrypted. While I was investigating that traffic, I wanted to find some sort of an account that could be related to the selling of fake likes and follows that would allow me to say, oh yes, this account on Instagram is related to a business that sells fake likes and follows, and thus I could say Linux Moose, just link it right away together, right? What happened is instead I ended up finding bulk reseller panels, like Media Nisa panel at the time, which is now shut down. So bulk reseller panels are simply panels that are actually selling fake likes and follows in bulk. The journalist I talked about earlier, she was really mad when she heard about this because she paid a very high price for the followers, whereas she could have gone on these reseller panels and paid them for a cheaper price. Where does our reseller panel stand in our ecosystem? Well, we decided to represent them as spiders and webs. Wonder why? And just a little bit above the automation software and the Linux Moose providers. So they simply look like that. They're actually, you can easily create an account with a fake email, with password, and they offer all sorts of services on all social media. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. What's interesting is that the prices are really cheap, and it differs among the reseller panels. But the cheaper you go into the prices, and the more shady the payment processes are. So like I wanted to buy 1 million followers for very cheap, and I could only pay in Bitcoin. You see what I mean? And what was interesting about this reseller panel when we were studying them is that, yes, they sold popularity in bulk, but they also all looked alike. So while I investigated 1, 2, or 3 of them, I was like, they all look alike. They all probably the same organization or the same people behind. So we did a simple investigation back then. So we gathered information on 343 reseller panels and gathered information on fingerprint of the web application, domain registration information, HTML content, and IP addresses. Very simple investigation. We clustered things together, and although it did yield some results, there was just one main result that I couldn't actually not look at, and it was the IP address. So 66% of our sample was being hosted on the same IP. So by just doing a simple passive DNS query, I ended up finding that this IP was actually hosting over 1,000 other websites, other domains, and all these domains were related to the resale of fake likes in bulk. So you can see here that you have panels called Gram Panel, Followiz.com, and they're all related to bulk reselling of fake likes and follows. And while investigating that, we found PerfectPanel.com, which is like the actor that sort of explains that trend. So Perfect Panel is a new actor in the ecosystem called Panel as a Service. So what they do is they help you by giving you a platform if you wanted to be into the bulk reselling of fake likes and follows without having the technical knowledge for it, right? So that new actor is represented as a wolf behind the spiders because it enables the reseller panels to exist, right? And it's right here in the ecosystem. So Panel as a Service, we found about 5 of them. Some of them had all their domains hosted on the same IPs, others didn't. And what they offered was a ready-to-go software, providing web hosting, and sometimes even domain name. And they even gave features where you could actually have APIs to receive orders and APIs to send orders. So you could actually just use 2 APIs, act in the middleman, and just try to sell in bulk. And if you were more of a manual person and you wanted to track your workers in a sweatshop, that was possible too. So you could actually see workers working, saying, I created a new fake account, here is the password, username, and all that. Here I give you just a screenshot of an example of a panel. It's not Perfect Panel, it's Indus Rabbit. So they actually give you a possibility to go on the demo and see how it works. So you see that this panel, all the users, and then what are their funds, and when was the last time they ordered. Above, you can see that you can click on the orders, the load history and all that. And even if you go and look at the API option, they even give you options to connect to APIs directly. So if you wouldn't have to be linked to Linux Moose, you would only have to connect to another reseller panel who's cheaper and then act in the middle, right? And then you see here you have SMM Papa, and then SMN Lights, cheap, and all that. While investigating, we were wondering how reseller panels were actually connected to Linux Moose, so how these two are linked. So what we did is we went on Black Hat World and studied, try to find conversation about the main providers, and we did. We found reseller panel owners discussing. Here I give you an example of one saying, mostly all panels use the same provider. The only difference is price. If anyone knows this provider, which could be Linux Moose or any others, he is welcome to contact me privately. And then you see that even though they're looking for the main provider is shielded. It's just an example here of somebody saying, no one will reveal the main provider. For them, it's their hidden ghost. And here I give you a very good, it's a little bit outdated because it was in 2017, but it sort of states the fact really well. The person says, guys, unless you're spending $1,000 on SMM panels, you don't need to search for the original supplier. He wouldn't be interested in your volumes, and you just need to find the most reliable reseller for the most cheapest resellers. In this market, you have to put your efforts not in buying cheap, but in selling more. However, when you think about it, it can't only be Linux Moose, right? There has to be other providers, other methods, because Linux Moose can't actually provide for this whole ecosystem. And then we found other people discussing of the fact that there was not only one provider, and there was several, and several methods were possible. And that made us thought, what kind of other methods could be used while using the automation software? And that.
So where do we stand here? We have a system of resellers and panel as a service provider. We have automation software to create and orchestrate fake accounts. What's the next hurdle for the bad guys doing in this market? Well, it's being blocked because you're proxying all your traffic to just a few sets of IPs, and these IPs are flagged. IP reputation is very important for social networks because it allows them to really filter, and block various accounts. So what is spawned to work around that hurdle is using high quality proxies. And this is when we, looking for an alternative to Linux Most to provide such proxies, found out about a large ecosystem of residential proxy providers. When you think about it, data center proxies are kind of easy to block, easy to identify in Whois and GeoIP databases. And so you can block a whole subnet of data center IP addresses, or even, the whole block, Azure, the whole thing, But if you think about residential proxies, you cannot block a whole subnet or a large portion of it if you're a social network operator, because you will stop receiving legitimate traffic. You will piss off famous people and stuff like that. So what they do is they need to have a very individualized approach to blocking, right? So as we've saw on Black Hat World CEO by Next Gen LEDs, which is labeled a junior VIP, he basically just posted saying, stop using data center proxies. Like fairly mad, right? So what we have here is a new actor enters the game, which is an alternative to Linux Moose, which would be legal or not. And this is what we wanted to figure out. Is residential proxy services built on top of compromised infrastructure, or is it really they lease the ISP landlines and they put servers in there and they proxy traffic through it? So this is a new actor in our ecosystem, which we've placed there. Foot's on the ground, but basement on the ground, and side by side with Linux Moose. And so still automation software, because of the proxy support features, would connect to the residential proxy provider as an alternative to build a botnet. We looked at high proxy, we looked at and we purchased residential proxies from high proxy, storm proxies, RSOCs, Valor Solution. I want you to take a few seconds to appreciate the glorious webpage that they have. The GOT reference, which I don't get because I haven't seen GOT. We purchased, and specifically from Valor Solution, has very different services and very cheap. We purchased the Comet USA static proxies, which are residential IPv6 proxies, 50 cents a piece for a month. And then we found about Luminati. Luminati is worth a few minutes of your attention because it's different than the others, because it has a business model and it says how it's operates, okay? In its use case that are clearly stated, they highlight account management. And it says manage social media account, including Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Craigslist, eBay, and more, without getting banned or disabled. So this is pretty clear what they're doing here. And so I have a short video of their business model, which they expose, that I want to share with you.
Grow your app revenue without hurting its user experience by joining Luminati's developer community. Embed our SDK and earn $5,000 per month for every 100,000 of your daily active users. Luminati is the world-leading peer-to-peer business proxy network. We help Fortune 500 companies collect web data through residential IPs so they're never blocked or misled. We do that by partnering with app developers and inviting their users to be peers in our network. When users download or upgrade your app, they will see this screen, allowing them to join our network and get your app for free. You can offer your users other options, like watching ads or purchasing your app. Users who choose to be peers would not feel any change, as their device resources will be shared only when their phone is idle, connected to internet, and has enough power, allowing you to earn money from your inactive users. Implementing our SDK is quick and easy. Grow your revenues while increasing your app usage and retention. Join Luminati's developer community today.
This is completely crazy, right? I couldn't believe it when I saw it. But unfortunately, we knew already that it was not built on top of compromised infrastructure, so we had to let it go. But also we found out that Trend Micro did a really good study about this. But I don't think this is the end for Illuminati. I think this kind of stuff should be illegal, and I think for us it's pretty shocking. But maybe, I don't know, we'll see. This is clearly a next chapter in the Illuminati story. But we haven't covered it because we knew it was like the user opt-in, basically. So the results of our research regarding the various residential proxies are as follows. We purchased from Storm proxies, and I skipped a few of them where the result were redundant for timing issue. As you can see, we're going through a lot of content here. We received IPs from the US, and what I found interesting is that the Whois database and the GeoAuth database from those IPs had conflicting information. Here we have an ISP that says Digital Energy Technology Chile, which is a legal ISP that exists, but the organization is Host One Plus, which is a hosting provider like semi-gray, bulletproof, operating in the US a lot. And traceroute led to the US. There was another example where Victoria Mahe, a legit ISP from Africa, but the organization name was Joe's Data Center, another US operation. So again, you know, maybe this is why they abuse this kind of mismatch of information by purchasing IPs and the database is not updated. This could be a lead here. So now we started scanning it, and we kind of did local scan using Nmap through the SOX proxy, and then external scans, and trying to see how it was built, how it worked. And we found out that they use a Squid for proxying, Storm proxies, and they don't protect scans from localhost. So we were able to fingerprint the operating system by correlating the information from the Squid proxy and the SMTP server. What we found out is that it's most likely using Debian Jessie, and we know Debian, you know, backport security patches, and so version numbers are pretty static for a given Debian release. So we know for sure that this is a Debian Jessie system. Now moving on to our SOX, it was very different in the way that the IPs were provided. They were all from the same subnet, so easier to block, I would assume. In Russia, the ISP from the GeoIP database was admin LLC, and when you Google about that ISP, you don't get any result. So should you block it? Should you not block it? It's not clear, but it's clearly not a data center. And the traceroute confirmed that it was really coming from Russia. It supported more protocols than the other residential proxies that we studied, with the addition of SOX 4 and 5 to it. When we scanned it, we found out that it exposed SSH on 3389 internally, not to the outside world. This gave us the SSH banner, which identified without a doubt that it's a Debian Jessie server. Unfortunately, we were not able to fingerprint the proxy service, which would maybe hint that it could be custom. So that's that for our SOX. Valor Solution. Valor Solution doesn't offer a panel. It sends the IP address and the username and password to use in a Discord message. So I have to show you the glorious webpage again. We received a single IP from France, which was clearly a dedicated service provider. And the Valor Solution, as opposed to the other residential proxy providers, tunneled the traffic. So if you do what's my IP, you would get a different IP than what you connect to, which is not what the others were doing. And the traffic went out in the US with a properly labeled AT&T Internet Services label. And the traffic out was IPv6 only. You couldn't do IPv4. So the GeoIP information from this gave a lake. Okay, I know it's not, you know, accurate GeoIP information. There's a radius which we need to take into account. But I find the idea of an underground data center beside, below a lake in Kansas funny, so I put the slide in there for you. Valor uses TreeProxy. TreeProxy is a very well known for malware researchers, a Russian open source proxy server which supports a very numerous amount of protocols and tunneling techniques. It was exposed on 1067 non-continuous port. We identify it by Nmap and with source code correlation. Their deployment protected local hosts from scans, so they were the only one protected local scans, both IPv4 and IPv6. And from the outside, when scanning the IPv6 IP, you would get no result at all. Not a single service, not an OS fingerprint from there. So 100% filtered. So, but the proxy and the SSH service on the entry, so the IPv4 and France entry of that service was running Debian 9 with Nginx and OpenSSH. Valor was clearly the other were clearly, you know, sysadmin, the work of a sysadmin and not compromised infrastructure, because all of the IPs were similar, running Debian and stuff like that. They were all correlated. But the Valor host is the one that was the shadiest, where we couldn't really pinpoint if it was running compromised infrastructure or not. So this is a summary of all the findings, and this is left as a reference for those who will download the slide and who needs this for work or would be interested in pursuing our research. Lastly, before moving on, I wanted to give a shout out to a paper that went out this year called Resident Evil, Understanding Residential IP Proxy as a Dark Service. So a pretty funny, clever name. It's a collaboration between Indiana University, Bloomington, and Tsinghua University with more than 10 people on that paper. And what they did is they had access to traffic. So they had deals with ISPs. And so this paper is a very different approach than us, where we were trying to assess compromised or not. But it's worth a look because of that different approach. And what happens through those residential proxy services is inside that paper for you to look at. So where do we stand now? So we have an IoT botnet or residential proxy services, different business model, different pricing. We have automation software. We have reseller panels and panels as a service providers. But who buys from the reseller panel? So we need to see from the buying standpoint, and there's someone buying from the reseller before the end users, right? And so Masarah is gonna cover this actor.
Yes, so who buys from the reseller panel? Well, we call them the customer-facing sellers, and they're the one chilling out in the tree and being cool because they're the one dealing with the celebrities and the agencies, right? So here I give you an example of a customer-facing seller. So they look much more legitimate than the bulk reselling panels. They actually offer really good process payments like credit cards and all that, and they have a much higher price. I put here Devumi because it's got a very interesting story. Have you heard of it? I guess maybe, but I won't know. So Devumi got into a legal proceeding with one of their partners, and they had to disclose their customers. And following that, the New York Times journalists sort of took that opportunity and created an investigation called the Follower Factory. In that investigation, they actually used a customer list that was being displayed due to the legal procedures, and they started to talk about how you could buy fake likes online and like flagging people who were the customers of Devumi. What's interesting from this is that the New York Attorney General took that investigation and even made it into a legal undertaking. So it announced a groundbreaking settlement in January 2019, where they said that selling fake followers and likes is illegal deception. And what they did is they fined Devumi for $50,000, which is kind of a small fine considering that the New York Times journalist said that Devumi made about a few $1 million a year. But it's still interesting because it gives us an idea of what can be done in one state and what could be done within other states and within other countries, right? And then obviously Devumi closed down following that investigation just because all their customers were being, you know, like shamed by the New York Times journalists. But they did close down, but it's not certain. They actually forward you towards other customer-facing sellers such as socialboss.org, Instagram, and YouTube Grow. And then finally, the buyers, right? The ones that are driving this. We picture them as squirrels. So they yield at the top of the tree above everybody because they sort of drive that business, and they're the closest one to social networks. So how did we sort of understand potential buyers? So this dates back to our 2015 investigation when we had access to, but we actually still have access to that plain text traffic. We knew that Linux Moose was focusing mainly on Instagram. So 86% of the traffic was going there. So we looked at the Instagram traffic and all the accounts that were being liked by Linux Moose. So we developed a sort of methodology where Linux Moose had liked an account or followed an account more than 5 times. It had to not be somebody like Kim Kardashian or other popular people on Instagram, because we know that they're actually following these people to look more human. And it had to have a low engagement. So you have 100,000 followers, but when you post a picture, you have 2, 3, or 550 likes, then it does show us that it's probably false. I know there's some agencies that say that 4%, like in terms of engagement, so if you divide the number of likes on the picture divided by the number of followers, it's 4% that gives you an idea of whether or not there's false followers in the following. And then we developed a content analysis, which means basically out of the 500 accounts we had for potential buyers, we just categorized them. What we found mainly is 20% of our sample was entertainment industry, so singers like this guy who had over 30,000 followers, but when you went on his YouTube account, it was much lower. Or guys like this person who is a TV personality, actor, global, jet setter, self-made. So entertainment industry. We found lots of selling products and services, so 21% of our sample. So it was like products that was always luxurious. So here you have watches, but we had also jewelries, and most of the branding was around the fact that it was luxurious, if I can say that word. And unfortunately, like a quarter of our sample was personal profiles. So these were individuals that didn't have any business models to actually buy fake likes and follows, but they still did. This sort of drove our analysis saying that it was ego market, because if you post pictures of your food and then you buy followers, you're aware that they're false. So, but yeah, this is more of another psychological research that has to be done. And then there's the unexpected ones. So this was about 65% of our sample. And there was a 30% something of our sample that I couldn't categorize because the things were so special all the time. And then I just highlighted the unexpected ones. So we found an Iraqi general from the Iraqi forces. We don't know, just remember, it's potential buyers, we haven't seen them buying, but this person is actually involved in the military. We looked at that, and they appeared in our traffic. We also found a few accounts that were related to spiritual magics, magicians, hypnotists. So here I give you an example of a lady who's a psychic, spiritual, reading magic. And interestingly, she called herself a home witch, which I'm not sure what it means, but yeah. And then the fascinating ones. So those are the ones I'll just show. So here we have an STD testing company. It makes sense that people on Instagram would not follow an STD company. So it did make sense that they bought followers for credibility, or that the agency related to their marketing was doing that. And we found dogs with more money than you. See, how can you categorize that, right? That's a thing. And it's always good to remember that there's dogs with more money than you, right? And then we made an experiment, and I just hope you get it. It's a duck face, right? So we knew Linux Moose targeted social networks, mainly Instagram, right? But we knew it was going on Twitter and on 3 other very odd social networks. So Periscope, Kiwi, and Flipagram. Kiwi is now not working anymore, but at the time it was a social network where you could ask questions, and you'd ask questions and people would answer on them. And we found a customer-facing seller that was actually selling Instagram, Flipagram, Periscope, and Kiwi services. So you could go and buy, likes on your questions for Kiwi. So we thought at that time, it fits very well in between that customer-facing seller and what we see in Linux Moose traffic. It fits very well. So what we did is we created a fake account called BeautifulBird33. I think at that time I was sort of buzzed by Instagram looking at too many profiles, so I ended up doing a profile that would look legitimate. And we bought 6,000 followers from that customer-facing seller. We ended up with 8,000 due to a story of me complaining not having enough. And the account ended up in our honeypots traffic. So this was a very good day for us and a very good moment, because we hypothesized how the let's see, and it ended up being in our traffic in our honeypots. So from this sort of experiment, what we can say is we went from acting as the buyer and we bought on a customer-facing seller person, and then we saw the traffic going through the Linux Moose botnet, right? So what we don't know is exactly what happened in the middle. Did the customer-facing seller actually purchase from a reseller panel and all that? But we knew that it was connected to our botnet. And then revenues. So this is the crunchy part, right? in 2016, when we presented at Black Hat Europe, what we did was take the number of the number of follows that each of our honeypots did, which amounted per month of about 1,000 follows. And we looked at the customer-facing sellers' prices, and we hypothesized that based on the number of bots Linux Moves had, how much money it would be making per month, right? So this was just an estimation, and we were like, well, if it has 3,000 bots, which is not that much, then it would make on average $400,000 per month, which seems to be quite expensive, like quite a lot of money, right? So we sort of gave all the profit from the industry to Linux Moves. Following our investigation, though, you do understand now that there's many levels, right? And the Linux Moves providers are actually not making that much money out of as we expected. So let's do a little exercise, okay? Squirrel or buyer buys 10,000 Instagram followers, okay? That buyer goes on a customer-facing seller, and we gathered information on 36 of them, and the median price was $95 for 10,000 followers. It's the median price because we couldn't take the average, the standard deviation was going all over. And then let's hypothesize that customer-facing seller would go on reseller panels, and the median price of these panels, out of 33 of them, which we focus only on untargeted followers services, was $22. Well, how much would Linux Moves make, right? How much would they make out of this? Well, the cheapest reseller panel that we found, where I tried to buy 1 million followers with shady payment processing, offered 10,000 followers for $1.8. Is Linux Moves related to the cheapest reseller panel is something that we don't know, something that we'd had to investigate more. But that's an idea. Meanwhile, in the industry, there's other people making money. So you have the software, the panel as a service provider, remember our Wolf, who makes a lot of money. So it makes, on average, $47 a month. And that's based on one client. So if you have many clients, you make a lot of money out of a month. Residential proxy services were $2 per proxy per month on average. And automation software panels automation software were making between $10 to $60 a month as well. So let's do a little exercise, okay? You want to be trending. You're somebody who, I don't know, you're doing a run and you want to be trending, and you want to buy 10,000 followers provided within a week, right? So while you do your event, then you get popular. We know that each bot related to Linux Moves performed on average 1,000 follows per month on Instagram. And why it isn't that much is mainly because it has to fake human activity. So it can't, just go like follow, 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 follow. It goes into an inbox, and then it fakes a lot of human activity out of the honeypots. And then that equals to 280 follows per week. So if we have, for example, we take just $2 per proxy per month, to actually being able to perform 10,000 followers, you would need 36 proxies at a median cost of $2. So you would have a flat cost of $72, which is quite expensive, right? It's not really possible to make that. And this is a little bit probably why automation through infected devices is used for fake likes and follows, or why Valar solution exists. Just to notify, like Valar was, we thought that the proxy were kind of shady, but they sell their proxy at 50 cents, which is much cheaper per month than the others. And just to say, they actually send you the proxy through email, and then you can go on a Discord server to talk about it. Let's continue and estimate Linux Moves capacity, right? So let's say Linux Moves have, so you have on the axis the number of bots, and on the vertical axis the number of monthly Instagram follows that Linux Moves can do. So if Linux Moves had, for example, 40,000 bots, it could do on average a bit above 40 million follows per month, okay? And then it's sad because we don't know exactly how much money Linux Moves is making or how much they're selling their fake followers, but we know that based on reseller panel prices, we know that the cheapest price was 1.8. And then the first quarter price was $12, and the median price was $22. So basically what you have to, the main takeaway from this is to see that if it was actually related to the cheapest reseller, Linux Moves would make much less money than we previously expected, right? Because if it had 40,000 bots, it would make less than less than $25,000. But if it was close to the median price, then it would make much more money. But overall, it's making less money than we first expected. And it's often something that we have to do as researchers. We always say prices and see malicious activity and link them together. But there's potentially actors in the middle that are actually making money out of this too. So this sort of finalizes our ecosystem of social media manipulation. So you have buyers, customer-facing sellers, reseller panels, software, panel as a service providers, automation software, Linux Smooth, and residential proxies. There's other research avenues that I want to mention. So obviously Linux Smooth is a way to automate fake likes and follows, but there exist also click farms, compromised accounts where an individual gets their accounts compromised and then it likes other people without knowing, and troll farms as well. We know with the whole scandal about Russia. And there's some researchers working on this right now. So there's a researcher called, what's his name again? Patrick Vandero, and what he does is he worked with reseller panels hosted on Perfect Panel, and he interviewed them. So interesting findings are going to come out from this. And there's researchers from a journalist organization too, interviewing people. So if you have hints on that, I could link you all of you together. But findings will be published soon. So what to do next? Very quickly. For policymakers, well, we thought look into the sale of social media manipulation, right? We know that the New York Attorney General actually made that illegal in their state, but it's interesting to see what's going to happen in other legislation. For law enforcement, well, what we thought was target the middlemen, so the panel as a service. So this person is actually enabling so many non-technical actors to be involved in the game and making money. So by targeting them, it would actually break the link in between the IoT botnets and the customer-facing sellers. However, that investigation has to know what is illegal, and illegally involved is more of a law enforcement work to do. And for social networks, we'll continue to flag any robotic activity. So if I did log in that Discord server, and it's interesting because right now Instagram has just published a new AI flagging new robotic activities, and all the people in the Discord server were actually chatting, saying that they had a hard time creating and creating robotic activity to do their fake likes and follows. So it's interesting, and that was just August 2 of this year. So it's interesting to see that this worked, and we're going to see how long it's going to work and how they're going to bypass that. And you, individuals, well, maybe focus on the content rather than the container. When somebody tells you, hey, look at this person has so many followers, instead of being impressed by the number of followers, be impressed by the content that this person is providing, and say that to the person is so much, it could help moving out of that ego society. So ask yourself, what is this person bringing to society? Is this post legit? And what are the sources too? And remember, I had 8,000 followers on my beautiful bird account, but now I only have 400. So when fake accounts are being flagged, you lose your followers. So this never lasts. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I think we're going to move somewhere else so we can discuss with you. Otherwise, you can follow us on Twitter and come talk to us. The artwork was done by somebody in Montreal, a graphic designer too, if you're interested. And thank you.